Diego, it is a pleasure of mine to have you on the Green Room today, brought to you by The Impact. I am super excited to learn more about what you guys are doing at Pachama. I've been following your guys' growth over the past year on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be able to see this and hear it right from you in terms of what you guys are helping address and the problems you're attempting to solve because the carbon offset marketplace. That's a really fascinating world that has gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, and it seems you guys have addressed some of the biggest issues in the space. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and the problems you're addressing over at Pachama.
It's my pleasure to be here. And yes, I am the co founder and CEO of a new technology startup called Pachama. Our mission is to help restore nature as a solution to climate change. We started actually with that insight, the insight that forest and other ecosystems play such an important role on fixing climate change. Trees, as they grow, we all know, sequester CO2 from the atmosphere, and that is what we need to solve climate change. Of course, we also need to move away from fossil fuels. That's what we mostly need. We need to stop burning fossil fuels and putting CO2 in the atmosphere. But in parallel, we also need to remove that CO2 that we put in the atmosphere. And I was blown away when I started looking at this solution, how little funding was actually going to nature restoration and conservation. At the time when I was doing my research, only 2% of carbon markets was going to nature-based solutions, to reforestation and forest conservation.
2%.
That's right. When I started asking around, how come nature receives so little funding, what I learned was that, well, first I learned the history of carbon credits, and if you want, we can go there. But started basically as a way to trade emission reductions for countries and for large polluters such as energy companies. And then it expanded into renewable energies. But in nature-based solutions was something kind of like a new iteration of carbon markets, strongly pushed on the Paris Agreement. Article 5 of the Paris Agreement focuses on forest. However, the problem was still lack of trust, because when it comes to reforestation and forest conservation, you basically have to trust that someone in another corner of the planet is going to be effectively not cutting down trees in an area that is effectively under threat of deforestation, or replanting and caring for a tree plantation in an area where that wouldn't have happened without the support of carbon markets. So in order to answer all these questions today, there are protocols and methodologies, and there are certification bodies that focus on providing the trust, but they do it or they did it historically in a way that was very manual. You send auditors to the field, you file a lot of paperwork to justify the project, uh, and the problem was that the nature of how this was being done prevented many companies from trusting carbon markets and preventing many landowners from getting started with carbon certification. So what we tried to do is, or that led me to want to start this company, seeing that there was a technology gap, and that technology could play a very important role at reducing the cost, at increasing the transparency, and just making the entire market more efficient, so that more funding could go to reforestation and forest conservation, ensuring that when you're buying a carbon credit, that carbon credit effectively represents 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere by a tree that is growing in another part of the world. And hopefully, ideally, helping local communities make an income of fixing climate change as opposed to making an income of producing climate change, and planting native species that also help with the biodiversity aspect of a conservation project. So to do that, we
Got it.
use satellite images, artificial intelligence, and the internet, basically to build a platform that can deliver on all these problems.
Have found a way, and there's a lot to unpack there, but it seems like you guys have found a way to automate the auditing process for what these pre-existing, I guess, certification bodies are already doing today, but they're sending out individuals, which naturally you can't have a human stationed at every
Right.
reforestation project across the globe. So you found a way to automate that entire process with satellite imagery and AI.
That's right. Yes. So still, there might be a component of on-site audit and on-site visit, but
Okay.
you cannot cover tens of thousands of hectares of Amazon rainforest, with no human, in no humanly possible way, right? So the only way to monitor in real time the size of a country of forest is with satellite data. And even when we had satellite data, but we didn't have computer vision, which is this technique of artificial intelligence that allows you to basically have an algorithm look at an image in real time, you still need humans to go pixel by pixel seeing whether there was deforestation or not. But now you can run an algorithm,
Got
and the
it.
algorithm is scanning the images and detecting changes. And if it detects a change, then you can basically double click and observe what's going on in the forest, right? Um, so
Got
yeah,
it. So you guys are literally using, I guess, I don't know how frequently satellite imagery you're able to get access to,
yeah,
but I'd imagine, let's say it's a month for just
that's
conversational
right.
purposes. You're able to use AI to say, okay, well, because these trees were planted on this acre of land in the Amazon rainforest, we know that trees are going to look like this in terms of coverage
That's right.
over X period of time. And you're backing it up with satellite imagery, and if there's a discrepancy, then you can dispatch a actual human to go check out what actually happened in that specific location, as opposed to
Yeah.
needing people to be scanning the full rainforest. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's intention. That's intention. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so then how does this play into the carbon, offset market or the
Yeah.
carbon market as a means to fund reforestation? Because that's something really unique that I've never really even heard of as the pitch for carbon markets.
Right.
Because usually the pitch for carbon markets, obviously through the years, and I'd love to understand from your own experience in learning about the space and how you guys have advanced the market with this auditing tool. But what is it about the carbon markets that really enable reforestation projects? Because that's a perspective that I've never even come across.
Yeah. What I would say that I like about carbon markets, or the way that carbon markets work, is the following. We need to decarbonize the economy, right? We need to reach
100%.
net zero. Um, we need to move totally away of fossil fuels, right? But that will
Absolutely.
take some time. And we still don't have electric airplanes, unfortunately, to replace the global air fleet. We still, are going to have cars burning gas for the next few
Right.
years. And even the most progressive places like California is setting up targets for 2030 to get rid of gas cars, right? So as
Right.
we transition out of fossil fuels, we can today start compensating the carbon that we are continuing to put in the atmosphere and the carbon that we put in the past. So certain companies are actually saying, we are investing heavily on decarbonizing, but we're also taking responsibility for the CO2 that we put in the atmosphere already. And the way that we're taking responsibility is by investing in removing this carbon through carbon markets, right? And then carbon markets come because an airline is not in the business of planting trees, and they cannot be in the business of planting trees. But an airline can say, well, you know what? Through carbon markets, through an effective carbon accounting mechanism, I'm gonna dedicate funds to compensate the CO2 that I put in the atmosphere, and that money is gonna go to remove CO2 from the atmosphere from trees that are growing or from other sources. There are many ways in which we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and other ways in which we can reduce emissions, and so in my mind, this is an effective mechanism to drive sustainable financing, to areas of climate solutions that prior, just were only relying on philanthropy or government funding. And the scale of the challenge of climate change requires hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, to go to the solutions, right? So it is essential that we make carbon credits work to drive funding to this type of projects.
It's almost like I guess if we had to bring in the stock market, it's like almost putting a dollar value on what a ton of carbon is worth, and you're using that as a means to purchase a tree. Like it
That's
may
right.
cost only $1 to plant a tree, but instead you're saying the value of that tree is worth $10. So the carbon markets help increase the amount of impact being delivered and actually cover the true cost of pushing reforestation efforts, which isn't a single tree, it's thousands of acres that need to be completely restored.
That's right. That's right.
Is that the right understanding of what the carbon markets are really enabling here?
That's right. Yeah, climate scale reforestation. And when I say climate scale reforestation, is that in order to move the needle on climate, we need gigatons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere. And to get gigatons removed from the atmosphere, you need to reforest millions of hectares. Now, that might sound like a very enormous mission, but if you compare it with other things that humans do, like building enormous bridges and building skyscrapers and sending rockets to the moon, reforesting millions of hectares is not that difficult to do. The only thing we need to do is just send money and ensure that the trees are being planted and kept there.
Right, because once you know that you can validate that every action being taken is an actual action that is delivering a quantifiable amount of impact, then it's just a function of how much capital do we want to push towards it.
That's right.
Which changes the whole perspective and the conversation around then I guess carbon offsets and what carbon markets are really enabling. If you present it in the sense, and really what it is doing is it's driving capital into reforestation efforts, whereas the traditional and where does that side of the world come from? Because when you typically read literature on carbon offsets, people tend to say, hey, this is a easy way for companies to not do anything for the climate. They're not really creating tangible impact. But in reality, if we're able to verify that a tree is planted and it is reducing certain tons of carbon, which we can know based on, I assume, the species of the tree,
Yeah,
then in theory, this is a really high impact action. And, anyways,
yeah.
climate is a societal issue.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I guess that what the criticisms sometimes come, and they are, yeah, reasonable when a company, let's take an oil company, right? An oil
Sure.
company might say, well, you know what, we are just going to plant a lot of trees and we're carbon neutral. Congratulate us, guys, and we're going to continue extracting oil and burning fossil fuels, right? And business as usual,
Mm,
right? So that's not the way that this should work, right? I mean, we cannot let oil companies keep going as if oil was not the problem, right? No, oil companies need to continue to transform their business, and there are some that are doing it.
right.
They're divesting, stop exploration and extraction of oil, investing heavily on solar and wind and renewable energies in general. Meanwhile, they can invest in reforestation and conservation and other carbon removal technologies to achieve carbon neutrality. So it's almost sometimes I compare it with health of a human, right? I mean, you need to
Hmm.
stop smoking and you need to start eating well, right? If you want to be
Right.
healthy, right? And one thing doesn't
You
mean
got
that
to
you
take
shouldn't
care
do
of
the
your body.
other, right? You need to stop doing the things that
Right.
do wrong to you, and you need to start doing the things that do good to you, right? So I think that's the way that I see here, how we're gonna build a sustainable planet.
Okay. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense because it seems like a lot of people were blaming the system. It's like in the sense of going along the analogy of the human body, it's like if you just eat ice cream
Yeah,
24/7, you're going to be very unhealthy.
right.
just because you bought a subscription to what's that product called? Weight Watchers
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you've you've done everything right. You've
Right.
gotten the food, you now need to change that habit. And there are companies that are just making the jump of, hey, I gave money, but they aren't making the actual internal
Right.
change that they need to. And
Right.
that's where that kind of publicity came from. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So what's been your journey with, carbon offsets, or more importantly, reforestation? Because what you guys are driving home and scaling is the ability to validate and, in my opinion, also accelerate reforestation efforts at a global scale. Because if you can
Yeah.
audit based on satellite imagery with the advances space technology is having, I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys may have real-time feeds soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
your journey been with reforestation?
Yeah. I mean, the journey has been, fascinating, learning so many different disciplines, because we had to learn about forest science, we had to learn about geospatial sciences, we had to learn about computer science and machine learning, we had to learn about cloud computing and terabytes of data being processed and analyzed in real time. We had to learn about finance and financial mechanisms, and we had to learn about international trade, because we're talking about Brazil and Peru and Indonesia and the US and Europe, right? So
Wow.
it unlocking this solution requires this very multidisciplinary effort. So to me, it's been about building a team that has all these different skills. And in a short period of time, I mean, the company has 2 years and a half, but we're already 23 team members, combining all these different disciplines. And we're also surrounding ourselves with advisors and investors that can help us, do it right from every perspective. Um, but it's just been fascinating to see so many talented people that want to be part of the climate solution.
Yeah, no, it's the kind of company that I would also want to work at, just because there's
Thank you.
impact and there's tech. And I think that goes for many people who are in the climate tech space. Because if you can get the best of both worlds in this case, both technology
Yeah,
advancements and climate impact, it makes it a really attractive proposition for anyone want to be involved with. My thought is then, or the question that immediately comes to mind, I don't think you're a forest scientist or a geospatial engineer. Is your co-founder by any chance? Did you guys like how did you
yeah,
guys get started? Is this
yeah.
something where you're just like, hey, we're gonna sit down and learn, or
Well, yeah, my co-founder is a machine learning engineer, and
Okay.
I am a technology entrepreneur. I would define myself. I did two other technology companies before, nothing to do with climate or forest or carbon. The two companies were in
Okay.
the travel industry, actually, because I was very passionate about
Really?
travel. And the first one was a mobile app to book hostels. The second one was a luggage system that allow you to track your suitcase anywhere in the word using GPS and 3G. Um,
Really?
but what I learned building these two companies is that you can create stuff. You can come up with an idea and that nobody thought before, or that somebody's tried before and failed, and then you can just go and try it, and then you can surround yourself with people that know different things, and then raise some capital, and then go and build it and launch it to the world, and then improve it and learn from it. So yeah, I mean, that's been kind of like my uh, addition to teams is to bring together talent and capital around an idea, around a vision, and then just you know persist on making it work, right? And I
Okay.
think
So you're
that
you're a
yeah,
true entrepreneur then.
I guess so,
So you,
yeah. And I do think that sometimes ignorance is bliss, because you don't know what you don't know, or you don't know that things are not possible in a certain way, and then you ask, why not,
right.
and I think that when it comes to innovation is basically that. It's basically looking at what are the technologies that are that have become available recently, how can they be applied to solve problems of the past, um, and and how you can think from first principles something, and yeah, in a way, I think that we need more of that, to solve climate change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how did you guys get started then? So
Yeah.
we've now connected the dots that you have a co-founder who I imagine is a close friend of yours, maybe even from past,
Hmm.
startups potentially. And that luggage thing, that sounds actually fascinating. I think I need one of those because I've lost luggage before on flights. But when it when it relates to when it relates to Pachama specifically and building a climate tech startup,
Yeah.
it it must have been really complicated to attract that first team of forest
Yeah.
scientists and geospatial engineers. How did you think through that? And because this is a big company kind of problem, this is an enterprise tech solution almost, I
Yeah.
would classify it as. How did you think through that entire process of getting
Yeah.
from idea to getting your first customer, I guess?
Yeah, I took about a year to research. Um, I
Okay.
was kind of like taking a sabbatical after my last company. I was
Okay.
burnout and tired, and I needed to kind of like reassess my life, if you want, even, and that's when I had this intention. This idea actually came after I did a trip to the Amazon rainforest with my two brothers, and I saw these
Hmm.
giant trees in the middle of the Amazon, and I saw deforestation, and I was like, this does make sense, right? So I came back to California. I just started reading books, you know, networking with people that could tell me some information about this, telling people in the tech world, hey, can you give me feedback about this idea? What do you think? And some people saw it, some people didn't see it, but I was just continuing iterating on the idea, and then eventually I started kind of like looking for a co-founder and looking for, okay, I want a partner to do this with. And then I connected with Tomas. He was actually not a close friend, he was an acquaintance. He's also from
Huh.
Argentina, so we share that. And he had very similar ideas to mine. He was actually in fact starting a project of his own with very similar ideas, so we kind of like merged two projects, or two similar ideas into one. um, and then our first engineer after him was a friend of ours that we were actually in a coffee shop in San Francisco, and I asked Tomas, hey, of all the engineers that who would be your ideal person to work with? And he told me Gonza. And then, okay, let's call him. And I called Gonza. Hey, Gonza, where are you? And he was doing some errands. Hey, can you come to this coffee shop in San Francisco right now? We have an idea to tell you. And then he came, and then he told me, I love it. I have some savings, but not a lot. So if you are gonna need to get paid at some point. I was like, okay, don't worry, I'll figure that out. And then another friend of ours also, he came to us and he said, hey, I know that you guys are starting this, I want to be part. And he came to us. And then our first forest scientist, I actually was looking for papers on people, on researchers using LiDAR and satellite to measure forests, and I found his papers. And then in a coincidence, someone introduced him to us. And then I jumped on a call with this guy. He was in Maine, and I told him, hey, can I pay you a ticket to come to California and spend 2 days with me and my friends, and we can learn from you and you can learn from us, and maybe we get to work together. And then I flew him from Maine to California. He stayed in my house, and then we over the weekend we talked about this idea, and he loved it. And then by the end, before he left, I offered him to join us, and he joined us, and that's how it happened. The first, and then similar stories for
Damn.
almost all the initiative members.
So not only was it a mix of serendipity to meet that scientist in Maine,
Yeah.
but the entire journey was, hey, you're working on a similar idea. Let's join forces. And then
Yes.
random phone calls to people who are like, hey, I like the idea. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
And you had already put together a rock star team then,
Yeah.
which probably led you guys to be able to put together your first, I guess, iteration of what Pachama's tech is and this auditing tool. And
Yeah,
Did you guys initially think that the target market was going to these enterprise companies? I know you guys have worked with Shopify now,
yeah,
and
yeah,
a couple of other really big enterprises.
yeah.
So was that the initial idea, or did you guys think, oh, wait, the impact for this is let's license this auditing solution to these
Mm.
certification bodies?
Yeah, no, the idea was actually the same that it is today. I the other day I went back and I watched. So we did Y Combinator. When we had this core team, we applied
Okay.
to Y Combinator, which is this accelerator here in Silicon Valley. The other day I went back and watched the pitch that I did to Y Combinator, and it's exactly what we're doing today. And so,
Wow.
I mean, we learn a lot, and there's a lot of nuances on how we do things, but the big picture idea was what we're doing today, and still the vision hasn't been fully realized. There are elements of the vision that are not still fully there, but broad strokes is a similar idea.
And what is your grand vision? Because it already seems like you guys have helped funnel millions, if not
That's right.
billions already, into reforestation efforts across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when you look at your website, it looks like Amazon Rainforest is one of them, and you're partnering with
Mm-hmm.
other, nonprofit organizations that are
Mm-hmm.
out there actually executing on the reforestation
Right.
projects. So what is the grand vision? Because, to any onlooker, we'd look at it and be like, Diego, in 2 years you've created more impact than most companies have in terms of just carbon reduction, or governments may have even in carbon reduction in 2 years that people take
Mm.
decades to do.
Mm.
So what is the grand vision?
Well, yeah, I mean, the grand vision is to expand that as much as we can. As I said, to move the needle on climate, we need mass reforestation and mass conservation of forest. Uh, you know, According to the World Resource Institute, there's 2 billion hectares available for forest restoration in the planet. That is the size of North America, distributed around the world. So we have a long way to go in terms of restoring, and the next 2 decades are key, are the critical decades of avoiding the worst of a climate crisis. So it's not just about driving the capital, but then it's about building the technology tools for all the players of this market to be able to scale their work, right? Um, when it comes to sort of like managing the operations of a reforestation project, there's a lot of things that we could be building, with technology, with digital technologies, to make it easier
Right.
to scale, right?
Right.
So I think we have a lot to do on the supply side, so to say, which is reforestation and conservation projects, and on the demand side as well, which is how do we expand the demand for carbon credits so that more funding can go. And then of course on the verification and monitoring side, there's so many more things that we could be doing, not only observing the carbon on the trees, but biodiversity and fire risk and so many other metrics that could be observed and predicted using artificial intelligence.
Huh. So not only is this, so the scale of the problem, I didn't even know, 2 billion hectares of of land that can be reforested. Like,
Right.
how much capital is that going to require to even get there? And is that even possible in a decade to 2 decades? Because
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah. Possible
so is
is,
it
possible is probably will
possible?
require a
Okay.
couple of $100 billion,
Oh
which is
wow.
it's a lot of money, but it's what tech companies have on their bank accounts, right? And it's what governments spend on COVID relief, So hundreds of billions of dollars when you're talking about a crisis that is endangering the very existence of civilization, hundreds of billions of dollars is nothing, right? So
Right.
it is possible. It's difficult. It's difficult because you need to scale, and you need to coordinate probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. But it's possible. I mean, humans, we have done things even more difficult than that. As I said, when I don't know if you watch these documentaries about mega engineering projects, right?
Yeah,
We do these mega engineering endeavors, right? That dwarf doing a reforestation project. So to
absolutely.
me, it's about channeling human ingenuity into this direction at the service of nature.
Absolutely, because it's it's a complex enough problem. Like obviously building the Burj Khalifa, right? That's an
Right,
insane kind of mega project.
right,
Or some of these new ambitious bridge projects, or even Elon Musk's tunnel efforts,
correct.
right? Trying to reduce the cost. But reforestation still has significant complexity when put into the frame of there's 2 billion hectares of land that just hasn't been reforested yet.
Right.
And, you know, in the large scheme of things, if 100 billion is the target, I mean, do you see that? Because, like, obviously, and you mentioned this as well, predicting wildfires, monitoring the impact of them. Obviously, that's one of the most, obviously, what happened in Australia, I think now, what, 2 years ago? And then
Mm-hmm.
subsequently, what happened in California, in Northern California,
Yeah,
which is where Pachama's based,
yeah,
to see something like that happen where people lost homes, people
yeah.
lost their lives even,
I lost my
it
home
shows you what this
on to
event.
the fires last year. So there you go.
So, I mean, how did that must have made it really personal then to
It
to
did
see
make it
what
very
this
personal.
impacted.
Yes, yes. It did make it very personal. Not that I need any more motivation for working on climate, but yeah, last year in August, I was camping with my girlfriend, and when I came back, my home was gone with everything I own. And yeah, climate change is happening now, and forest restoration and management is needed more than ever because of that. In fact, it's something that we're going to have to consider as we plan these restorations is, well, we need to make them resilient to a warmer planet.
Right. And I'm sorry to hear about that loss.
Yeah,
I'm more grateful that at least you're in good health and
I
and
am.
and
Yes,
still
I'm
here with
grateful
us
too.
today. So I mean, it's it shows you that there is a significant shift occurring, right? There's
Yeah.
awareness in the consumer space as well. Do you believe that the next step to get to that, let's say 100 billion is the goal, right?
Yeah.
And it's not going to come from a single individual or source. Do you suddenly
Right.
start to see after those wildfires, obviously a number of people starting to say, how can I also offset my own small carbon footprint? Or buy into carbon
Yeah.
markets that you guys are helping validate, or these offsets that you're helping validate,
Yeah.
do you start to see consumers reaching out to Pachama saying, what can I do? It's
Yes.
$100, but it's something.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, again, we started with big corporations as our target customers, but we are, working on making it possible for anyone, for a small business, for a chain of restaurants, or for a family that wants to, dedicate part of their income to compensating their carbon footprint and to restoring forest. If you look at, the revenues that companies like Spotify or Netflix make just with $10 per month, from hundreds of millions of families around the world. Imagine if every family would chime in $10 per month, we would be driving billions of dollars to forest restoration and conservation. So yes, I think that, well, I do think that corporations are way more responsible for the crisis, and therefore they have to be responsible for the solutions, and governments too. I do think that everybody has a role to play. If we are in such a crisis, we should all be trying to help somehow.
And what do you think is triggering that consumer behavior? Because, when I traveled to the Bay Area, I live in New York, but when I come to the Bay Area, obviously the perception around obviously impacting and doing something about the climate is at the peak of the peak,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm.
But does it require, even though at a national or even a global scale, everyone knew about what was happening in California and the potential dangers it had? I remember reading news reports that said that if wind was blowing in from the Pacific, then this could have been far more devastating than it was.
Yeah.
But what does it require a crisis of that scale
Yeah.
so close to people's homes to really drive change? Or have you guys been recognizing different ways to empathetically
Yeah.
educate people as to how
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
be involved, even if it's not voting with their dollar?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes it does require this type of orange sky moments. Like here in California, we had an orange sky day last year, in which literally it looked like Blade Runner, the movie, and you couldn't see the buildings of all the smoke coming from the fires. And those moments definitely produce a big awakening for many people. But one of the things that we are trying to do, or we will do more of, is to show with satellite data what's going on in the world, right? The deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, right? The loss of ice sheets on the poles, the desertification of areas that used to be agricultural areas. All that we can see now with satellite images in real time, right? And these are the
Right.
direct effects of a warmer planet and of a system that is actually still extracting and destroying natural resources as if that didn't have an impact on the climate, right? So there's new tools and there's a new partnership that NASA launched to observe methane emissions coming from lots of different sites around the world using satellite data. So I do hope that you cannot connect to what you cannot see. So I hopefully this
Right.
this new enhanced vision that we have, which is viewing the planet from space, can help us realize the enormity of the crisis.
Right. It's almost like you can only connect with what you can touch, feel, see.
Yeah,
So that way, it's it's almost like it would be interesting where people would follow Instagram and an Instagram account for the
yeah,
Amazon rainforest, and
yeah,
daily you just see it updating with satellite imagery from you
yeah.
guys.
It's a new
And
phenomenon if you think about it. Up until the first picture that we took of planet Earth happened in the 70s. In the 70s, when Carl Sagan asked the controllers of the Voyager to turn the camera back, and we took the first picture of planet Earth, right? That happened when my parents were adults almost, right? And now we have like real-time imagery of the planet. It's a new phenomenon. It's a new perception organ that we have awakened in the last few decades, and hopefully it's not too late.
right. Well, I mean, obviously with the acceleration, yeah, and obviously I don't think there's a minimum acceleration we need to be aiming for. It needs to
Yeah,
be how quick do we get to that $100 billion mark.
yeah,
It's it's a really fascinating state we're in because we have the technology now to be able to actually enable at a global scale, consumers and individuals, companies and corporations to actually invest into and vote with their dollars and their resources the things that are important to them. And we're seeing at a large scale that people care about the climate, no matter
yes,
whether you
yes,
swing Republican, Democratic.
yeah,
It's become a bipartisan thing, which is a
that's
beautiful
right.
sight.
Yeah,
Um, so I guess then the only follow-up question I would think about is with your experience, and you mentioned you come from the travel industry, starting
yeah,
with two tech companies there, one to book
yeah,
hostels, and then obviously track luggage, which again, two really fascinating things, and I'd love to dig into that as well. Maybe you'll get a chance to share a little bit with us too. But the thing I'd really be fascinated about is obviously the changes between running an early stage company, investing in an early stage company, and hiring those initial people is completely different from talking about Pachama could potentially be one of the big players managing now
mm-hmm.
a portion of that $100 billion pot. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
assume that
Mm-hmm.
that actually occurs.
Yeah.
I in fact hope that it occurs.
Thank you.
That in a in that kind of a world, what does Pachama need to do, and what are you thinking through with your team and your
Yeah.
co-founders that's going to enable you to get to that stage?
Yeah.
What's going to change from today, Pachama, to 10 years later when you're back on the show and you're sharing, hey, Swarnav, we did it.
Mm,
Now
mm,
we've completely reforested every
mm,
hectare that was available to us, and we're in a better spot as a world. We've done what we wanted to do, and
mm,
now we're going to maintain the status quo
mm.
because we're going to continue to
Right.
maintain. What does that next 10 years look like for you?
Yeah, well, I guess this is what I, think about every day, right? And I do think that there's a level of just faith, if you want, of just walking straight towards your vision, and you'll figure out the steps along the way. But there are a couple of things that I know to be true. First is
Okay.
that a group of very smart, passionate individuals working together with alignment can change the world. And we've seen that many times in the history of humanity. So one of my things that I know is I need to keep recruiting smart, passionate people, and then ensure that we're all aligned, working in the same direction. Um, the second thing I know to be true is that uh, you can do things with leverage or without leverage, right? And doing things with leverage means doing things thinking of how technology can help us scale this, right? And I think we need to do that. The power of the technologies that we have unlocked in the last few decades with the internet, with cloud computing, with artificial intelligence, is that it allows us to augment human powers to reach global scales, right? Think Airbnb, think Uber, think Amazon. These companies in 1 or 2 decades have, touched every corner of the planet. That was
Right.
unthinkable, only a generation ago, right? Vanderbilt and J.P. Morgan and Carnegie Mellon are dwarf compared to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Brian Chesky in terms of the impact that they have had in the world, and it's because of these,
Right.
multiplying technologies. Um, and and then I think a lot about values, and at the end of the day, an organization is about a group of individuals that share values in addition to sharing a vision. And it's very important that if you are thinking about global impact, that you keep a close eye into what are the principles and values that you want to bring to that. So to me, integrity is an essential value and essential part of doing this, because it's not just about solving the problem, it's about building a new civilization that hopefully is more beneficial for humans and for the rest of the species in the planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess then to wrap up our beautiful conversation, the only thing I would want to love I'd love to hear from you because it seems like you've had a journey of building two startups. Not sure how big they went, but it seems like every step of the way you've had to step back and relearn new things about a new problem that you've become passionate about. And
Mm-hmm.
you found something that you care so much about that you're willing to build to do whatever you can along with your team for the next decade for you. What's that one thing you would like founders who might be early off or at a similar stage or getting to a stage that Pachama's at, or investors that are looking for the next Pachama that
Mm.
is going to create impact, not from a
Mm-hmm.
financial perspective, but from I'm looking for the next impactful Pachama. What are those things about your industry and your experiences that you think everyone, beside whether you're an investor or whether you're a founder early on in the journey, what's
Yeah.
that one key thing you would say everyone needs to take away and keep at
Mm.
heart?
The first thing that comes to my mind right now is long-term thinking. I think that one of the problems of our civilization and our economic system is short-term thinking, right? Investors wanted to make a buck, right away, flip a stock, right? Or investors keeping CEOs only accountable for the last quarter, right? And founders or people wanted to become rich and successful very quick, right? This is not the way to go about climate tech. The way to go about climate tech is to think 2 decades, to think 2040, right? And to make decisions and to have visions that are long-term thinking, and for investors too. And this is something I was very fortunate to get investors who are thinking in that way. Investors that don't expect to make a return on their investment in our company in 10 years, but in 20 years, right? So I think that will be my message. Think long term, and then of course act short term, but envision long term.
Absolutely. So it sounds like it's about alignment also in values, the way it seems, because your
Yeah,
investors need to believe in the same goals that you have. They're bringing to the team resources and potentially even connections.
yeah,
So really, it's all just a really big family
that's right.
working on
Yeah,
one problem.
that's super.
So
That's super important.
awesome. So I guess then, with that being said, Diego, I'd love to know if anyone wanted to connect with you and continue this conversation and follow Pachama. How would they find out about you guys? Where would you typically send them? And if they
Yeah.
want to reach out to you, is there a best way to reach you?
Hmm.
What's the way people can connect with you after this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, the two social networks that I use and that the company uses are LinkedIn and Twitter. So follow us on
Awesome.
LinkedIn and Twitter, and of course, come to our website. We do have a newsletter that you can sign up to, and we're sending news every so often. But yeah, you can find us there.
Awesome. Alrighty, Diego. This
All right.
was hopefully painless.
It was. Thank you so much, Swarnav.
So
It's a pleasure to share it with you.